The only thing I could come up with when I was thinking was that, God damn it, cat. The only thing I was thinking was that we could offer Heavy Hands branded diapers, given the new trend in combat sportswear.
What the fuck is happening there?
This is Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, dude.
This is just, I hate this fucking cat.
Yeah, that is about the loudest cat I think I've ever heard. He got opinions, huh?
Yeah. Goddamn. So the Heavy Hands branded diaper is out.
Alternatively, Dustin Poirier is selling his shorts for charity.
Oh.
Would like to buy them purely to extract Anthony Pettis' DNA to clone him and teach the clone some fucking footwork.
I like that one. Oh, you couldn't get it from Anthony because there's none left.
No, it's literally, he left it all in Norfolk.
Literally every ounce of blood in his body was absorbed into Dustin Poirier's shorts, so we've got a lot of material to work with. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me is Dr. Patrick Wyman. And today we have a bizarre grab bag of topics for you, and we are going to be kicking the show off with a preview of next week's UFC card that is main evented by Fabricio Werdum in a fight with Werdum-Tybura. Not a great card, if we're honest. We just had a nice, healthy discussion about how weird and it borders on interesting almost throughout the entire lineup, Pat. It just comes...
But it never quite gets there.
Yeah.
It borders on interesting is the perfect way to put it, because there are a whole bunch of fights that you'll watch and they'll probably be entertaining and perfectly fine, and then you'll never think about them again. So if that's your threshold for how you're going to spend an evening of fight watching, that's great. But it's... there's nothing on here that really stands out as like, oh, this is going to be a division-defining fight, or This is absolutely 100% guaranteed fireworks.
Yeah, let me put it this way. If this was like UFC 216 or some other big pay-per-view event, I might be able to say about 3 or 4 of these fights, hey, this is sneakily one of the best fights on the card. But because there is no massive tentpole type of battle to surround these, they all feel a little underwhelming, if we're honest. Just a little bit. But there's some good stuff here. We'll start off with the main event, right? I guess I should first say what we're going to do for the rest of the show today. We're also going to be getting into, after this relatively short preview, I imagine, we're going to get to recapping the results of UFC Fight Night 120, I think they called it, in Norfolk, Poirier versus Pettis, which did have a lot of, at least a fair amount, of meaningful stuff to talk about. And especially as the card went on, quite a few very entertaining fights. And also some, really weird, awful ones. But we'll get into that when we get to it. At the end of the show today, I think we're going to get to some questions from our listeners. We're going to reach into the heavy bag and see what you guys have to say. So let's kick things off with the main event here. Fabricio Werdum, after a very, very quick submission of Walt Harris, returns to take on Werdum-Tybura. What do you... I mean...
What a stunning endorsement of this main event fight coming to us live from... What venue is this? Where are we?
Well, the Kudos Bank Arena, of course, in Sydney, Australia.
Oh, New South Wales.
You know how they feel about Fabricio Werdum and Werdum-Tybura in New South Wales. Werdum-Tybura, I mean, when he fights, there's nobody in the streets in New South Wales.
That is absolutely true. Well, this was supposed to be Tybura versus Mark Hunt, but the UFC pulled him after him talking about having some possible brain injuries after his many, many years of taking shots to the head. And yet, Michael Bisping headlining a UFC card
right?
Shortly after this. So that's a great double standard we're showing there.
It is just a PR concern, right? It's because Mark Hunt talked about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah. Whereas Michael Bisping doesn't have to mention that he can't see out of one of his eyes, and so it's not a problem.
We're all aware.
Yeah,
we're all aware of this already. But this is a pretty good heavyweight fight as these things go. This is the quintessential will this younger guy, relatively speaking, because Tybura is 32 years old, will the youthful, sprightly 32-year-old be able to take on this defender of the old guard in Fabricio Werdum, former champion, guy who's been an elite heavyweight for the better part of the last decade? Will the guard change or will it not? That's reasonably compelling as these things
I'd say so, yeah. And I think we can give a little shine. Like there's a lot of criticism you can lob at the way that WME has been running the UFC since taking over, or the way that the remainders of Zuffa have been running the UFC while WME has been sort of pretending to pay attention. But we have given plenty of credit to the matchmakers, and the matchmakers are doing the best they can to give WME, to give their overlords, a new generations of potential stars and interesting divisions. We mentioned it with welterweight. We had, Darren Till winning. We had Colby Covington getting his big breakthrough. We expect that Kamaru Usman's probably going to get a similar fight soon. And now here at heavyweight, we have people like Junior Albini. We have Marcin Tybura. We have Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades. We have a lot of younger fighters that are now starting to be matched with some of the older members of the old guard in this division, which I think is a great idea. Like Marcin Tybura is exactly the kind of fighter who you need to find out, can he beat these top 5 guys or not?
Yeah, he's won 3 in a row. He has, against steadily increasing competition, including a decision over Andrei Arlovsky in his last outing, a much diminished looking Arlovsky. That was probably the most depressing Arlovsky performance out of his recent run.
We'll get to compare favorably against it when we talk about Arlovsky's fight with Junior Albini, in which he looked kind of refreshed.
Yeah, he looked really good.
Yeah, I would say so too.
Yeah, so Tybura, I mean, what do you make of him, Connor? This will be his 5th fight in the UFC. He's not exactly a newbie at this point. He debuted a year and a half ago. We should have a fairly good sense for what kind of fighter he is. What is his ceiling? Is he a future elite guy in this division?
He could be. It is always difficult to tell with a fighter like Tybura, because I can so easily look at him and say, your style would not work south of 170 pounds. Right? Like, his striking is kind of Jake Collier-esque. It's not particularly smooth or fundamentally sound. There are tons of weird little moments between strikes where he looks astoundingly vulnerable and somehow narrowly manages to get his head just out of the way of return fire, despite like having his chin flying up in the air and both feet out of position because he's reaching for the target. And yet, I think he has gotten considerably more comfortable. I think he has begun working on his boxing, so now he clearly has the eyes of a boxer more now, even if his technique is still a little crazy and wonky with his hands. And I think the big thing about Tybura is that he just looks comfortable being pressured. He looks comfortable exchanging. He often used to have this vibe about him, like in his M1 fights, where he was you could break him. You could change his mind about his, like, you could change his cocksure attitude by pushing him into a corner and cracking him with a few good shots. And I don't think that's Marcin Tybura anymore, which is probably the best improvement he has ever made in his career, is just gaining the confidence to go toe-to-toe with somebody like Andrei Arlovsky and not be worried about getting caught with what's coming back at him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you hit on a lot of the really salient facts there. The one that I would add, and the one that seems especially relevant to me in this matchup, is for all of his improvements in the striking, Tybura has to be moving forward or have his feet planted. He has no idea what to do when an opponent pressures him or comes after him. He just doesn't know what to do. He kind of backs off until he hits the cage or until he can kind of try to cut an angle to get back to open space. He doesn't really know how to counter if it's not winging punches in the pocket. He doesn't have like any sort of real arsenal of shots to throw.
I would say those two pieces of analysis are probably tied together, right? Like Tybura's defense is so crazy and improvised that he's never in position to respond with anything when he has to defend himself.
Yeah, he's like a lot of dudes who have a lot of experience and have come up in a lot of big fights over the years. Like what he does is less systematic than it is, like you pointed out, improvisationally effective.
Yeah, he's feel based.
Yeah. And that speaks to the quality of experience he has, because he wasn't a dude who came into the UFC as somebody who had just beaten up a bunch of scrubs. Like, he had fought really good competition on the regional scene over the years. Like, he had been in the fire with real good guys. So it makes sense that that's the kind of fighter he is. What do we make of Fabricio Werdum at this point? If we think Tybura is a pretty talented guy, he's got a game that works. I mean, we've talked about his striking, but he's also a pretty effective wrestler, like a pretty dang effective wrestler. And most of all, but his best skill set by far is top control and eventually trying to get to the back.
Yeah, the question with Werdum, I guess, is we have been talking about him as a striker for so long because it's what he seems most content to do. It's tough to know if him just insta-tapping Walt Harris presages a return to a wrestling and grappling heavy style, now that I think he maybe even knows that he's slowing down a little bit in the feet, maybe losing a touch of his durability, losing some of that youthful timing, finally now at the age of 39, losing some of that youthful timing. I don't know. I think we both agree that Werdum, he looks like he's lost a step. It's hard to tell when he takes on somebody like Walt Harris. I mean, do you agree with that? I guess I should ask you rather than presuming.
Yeah, the fight where that really seemed clear to me was the Overeem fight last summer, which I had the misfortune of seeing live.
We were both quite frustrated with that one. Even though I picked Overeem, I didn't want to be right about my pick that way. It was
I mean, I will go to my grave thinking that Werdum deserved to win a god-awful decision there, but that was a bad performance. It was a bad performance in every possible way. He looked slow. He looked like he couldn't pull the trigger. He looked kind of afraid of what Overeem was throwing back at him. Like, there were very few positives to take from that, in my opinion, compared to what we'd seen from Werdum before. If you wanted to go further back than that, you may disagree with me on this. I think he looked pretty much fine in that second Travis Brown fight. Like, I thought that he was basically the dude he's been for quite a while. That Overeem fight, that was like, yeah, you could make the argument that that's not good. To beat Tybura, he needs to fight more like he did in that Travis Brown fight. He needs to find his confidence. He needs to just let his shots go, because Tybura, we didn't really talk about this. Tybura is going to throw volume. Tybura is going to work at pace. He's going to, he landed like 50 some odd strikes in that fight with Arlovsky. He's going to throw, a solid 10, 12 a minute. When Werdum, like in his run over the last 5-6 years has been good, he's been throwing 15 or 20 strikes a minute. He has pushed a pace. He works real fast for a heavyweight. In that Overeem fight, it was like 5, 6, 7 strikes a minute. He can't work at that pace and expect to win that fight with Tybura. So if it's a striking matchup, Werdum just needs to let his shots go. I'm not sure he can at this point. I think until we see him fall apart against a fighter of Tybura's caliber rather than a still effective heavyweight like Overeem, I guess I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. But what do you think about the grappling matchup here? Like, do you think either guy is going to try to go for takedowns?
Yeah, I mean, I have to assume that Werdum will. I have to assume, because it only seems like it'll make sense. I think you hit the striking dynamic, the nail on the head with that, because your point about Tybura not fighting well going backwards, that kind of holds for both of these guys. Neither one of these guys can fight well going back. So I think if Werdum cannot force Tybura back, he may then even have a very hard time getting in on any shots. He's not exactly a reactive shot specialist. I'd be surprised if he could easily get Tybura down from the clinch, where he's pretty slippery and has good balance. You've got to, I think, get in deep on Tybura's hips to get an easy takedown on him and to hold him down. So, yeah, if Werdum can't push forward and make Tybura back up consistently, then we're going to see that, Verdum's defense, when he's backing up, is actually even worse than Tybura's. He really is not a fighter who gets by on defense. He has a style that works because he works when he doesn't have to use his defense, when the other guy's just always reacting to him, always trying to respond, always trying to survive, and he just gets to dictate the pace. In that kind of fight, I would not be surprised to see him get Tybura to the ground. As you said, he's an underrated wrestler. I remember way back when he had the first fight with Travis Brown, you were talking about the head inside single, which most wrestlers would say is the proper single. Werdum has a very solid single leg. He's very good when he gets in on changing angles. He can hit a crackdown. He can run the pipe and go the other way. He can lift up and pull down. He's pretty crafty when he gets in on that single leg. I think that's probably the way he'll get Tybura down, and probably against the fence. But as always with Werdum, right, the question is, honestly, I think Werdum he's only really the grappler we think of him to be when he gets somebody down in open space. If he can only hit takedowns after pushing Tybura against the fence, then I think Tybura can probably pop back up. That was his problem against Mark Hunt too, right? Like he just couldn't get Mark Hunt down in open space, and so nothing really happened on the ground. Whereas the moment he got Walt Harris down in the open octagon, just like the moment he got Antonio Nogueira down in the middle of the open octagon, it doesn't matter how good you are on the ground. If he has space to move and you can't lean against the fence to stand up, Werdum will take an arm home or he'll take your neck. But if you can only get Tybura down against the fence, man, I don't know. I guess I'm down on Fabricio these days. I'm a little worried about him not being able to find the right path to victory against Tybura here.
If Tybura were a harder hitter, if he, I don't know. I think Tybura is a fine fighter. I think he's going to fill out kind of the bottom half of the top 10 in this division, but I just don't see him. He just does not strike me as the kind of guy that's super worrisome, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think he's going to be able to take down and hold down Werdum. No. I don't think that he's going to work at such a quick pace on the feet that he's going to bury Werdum in volume. And I don't think he hits hard enough that Werdum needs to be worried about what he's throwing at him. Like, Werdum is definitely maybe not the fighter he was back in 2014 or 2015, but I just am not sold on Tybura being the kind of matchup. Like, of all the potential matchups of up-and-coming heavyweights that are out there, I don't think that this is the dude that really worries me, because he's not super athletic or fast to start with. He's quick paced, but not incredibly quick paced. He's a really good grappler, but not like a mind blowing one. Yeah, I'm still going to take Werdum here. I think that, like, if he loses this fight, then we can officially say the decline is here. You know? Yeah.
No disrespect to Tybura, but it would be a new low bar of what fighter Werdum can or cannot beat.
Yeah. It's also possible that, like, I'm reading that list of things that I gave you entirely wrong, that maybe it's because Tybura is a pretty quick-paced fighter. Maybe it's because he's a pretty good wrestler and a pretty dang good grappler. That maybe those are reasons to be worried, but I actually think that just kind of plays into the kind of fight that Werdum is going to feel comfortable in.
Yeah, to me, those still kind of feel like reasons to be worried, if I'm honest. I think if I imagine that Werdum is still going to have difficulty pulling the trigger, which I think he also looked like that in the Travis Brown rematch. I thought he looked kind of weird and slow and could only really lead with power shots for a lot of the fight. Like, lost his jab, lost his volume for long stretches, and then did that for much of that Alistair Overeem rubber match. If he has any of that against Tybura, then I think Tybura does have enough volume that he can dictate the fight. And if Werdum is not coming forward, I don't think he can win rounds in this fight. I just don't see how he can fight off the back foot any better than Tybura can, really. You know, it's not something Werdum does. It's just not something he does. He can stand his ground and trade. But again, I think that would require me to believe that Werdum still has the gumption to do something like that. And I'm not sold that he does.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. It's not like you're drawing on things that seem totally foreign or disagreeable to my point of view. I just think until we see Werdum lose to a guy of this caliber, I'm not going to pick Werdum to lose to guys of this caliber. That's not an insult to Marcin Tybura. It's just like, I think there's such a strong divide in this division and at light heavyweight between the guys who can do it and the guys who can't. And Marcin Tybura at this point does not strike me as one of those elite dudes. Like, I just do not see it with him. And frankly, I never have. Like, there was a reason why in the years of scouting prospects I never had Tybura especially high on a list. Like, because he's not a great athlete, because none of his skill sets stands out as being, like, so overpowering. And maybe that's being unfair to him.
He's just like, he is very much like the 2011 picture of a Polish fighter. Like, I think he's a little better put together than that. Like, I think his skill sets have a little more connection to them than the classic. Yeah, they're not totally disconnected, which used to be the running joke from all analysts about Polish fighters, I guess, is that they just, like, most of them can wrestle pretty well and grapple pretty well, and they have some cool strikes, and then everything is just totally reactive. Like there's just no tissue connecting these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tybura is a little better put together than that, but but it would make sense that like he's not a newbie, like he is a prime fighter. This is his time to do this. He's not really a prospect. Like he is a guy in his prime who's taking the next step at this point. So I guess my pick is going to be Werdum by late submission, maybe. I don't know. Something along those lines. Are there other? And you're going to take Tybura. How do you think Tybura wins?
I'll take Tybura by awful decision.
Okay,
by a decision that starts off fun and slowly becomes awful.
That is, I could actually see Werdum gassing hard.
Right.
That's certainly possible. It surprises me that Verdum's a 3.5 to 1 favorite here.
That is a little shocking. It's hard to have that much confidence in him these days.
Yeah, I would peg him as as no greater a favorite than like minus 240. That seems about right to me. I
think that's fair. Just like last weekend, we had who was a massive underdog that came through last weekend. They should not have been as big an underdog as they were. Hold on, I'll look quickly at the card and refresh my memory. It was Andrei Arlovsky against the untested Junior Albini was a plus 250 underdog, which seems a little wide considering the experience gap in that fight.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. We don't want to spend too much time talking about Fabricio Werdum versus Marcin Tybura for fairly obvious reasons. What else stands out to you on this card? Like, what other fights should we be keeping an eye on here?
Well, Tim Means Bilal Muhammad sounds fun. Jake Matthews moving up to welterweight. You mentioned before. What are the ones that are? We already talked about Will Brooks, Nick Lentz, because that's a rescheduled fight. How about this? Here's an interesting one that I think we'll both have something to say about. Let's talk about the flyweights down in the Fight Pass prelims. Janelle Lausa versus Eric Shelton. We're both big fans of Eric Shelton.
Yeah, super good athlete.
Oh yeah,
really, really, really good athlete. Really incredibly physically talented guy. I really like his wrestling game. I really like the way he puts his hands together. That strikes me as a dude who, after a couple of rough fights early in his UFC career, because he lost a tough fight to Jared Brooks, and then he lost a tough fight to Alexandre Pantoja. Like those are real tough matchups. Brooks is a really good fighter. Pantoja is a really good fighter. I think Lausa is kind of more the speed for where Shelton's at.
Yeah, and it's the right kind of fight, I think, to give him. I mean, Laos is dangerous, too. Like, it's a perfect fight. I think Shelton is a phenomenal athlete, as you said, but he's very crafty for a young and relatively inexperienced guy. His composure really stands out. He does not get rattled, which is why I think he was able to take two more experienced, and most people would have thought going in, much more dangerous and more promising fighters in Brooks and Pantoja, both to split decisions. They made
those are both split. Like the fact that those were both split decisions bears repeating here. Yeah. So I think, but Lausa is also very talented. I like Lausa's striking game a lot. I like his hands. He's crisp. He's real tight with his hands. I like what he does. I think Shelton probably wins it, but I hope that doesn't mean that they get rid of Lausa. I hope he gets to stick around for another fight. If that's the
trouble
case.
Trouble with flyweight, right? Is that. Like even Eric Shelton, like a very good, promising young fighter. He's 0-2 in the UFC. Say something goes wrong and he loses this fight, they'll probably cut him. It's like he deserves to stick around and get on track. You know, he's probably going to go somewhere as a fighter.
Yeah, I mean, this is a division where they need to kind of operate differently than they do at others because there's little depth of talent and because the guys there has not been a ton of turnover at the top for years. Like. They need to cultivate young talent, which I think they're doing. I think fights like this are great for cultivating young talent. Sure. So that's a good fight. I think we're gonna like that one. Alex Volkanovski is a guy that you and I are both big fans of. He is fighting. He was supposed to fight Humberto Bondone, but didn't Bondone get pulled off? Did they replace him with somebody?
It was originally supposed to be Jeremy Kennedy versus Alex Volkanovski, which I think would have been a fascinating fight between two like wrestlers who have never been denied the chance to out-wrestle someone. So that would have been fascinating. Then it was going to be Humberto Bondone, and then now it's Shane Young, which there's not a huge amount of... That's the problem with this card, like many UFC cards. Alexander Volkanovski deserves hype. He is a very exciting and very promising fighter who is almost certainly going to be, I think, jumping up the rankings very, very soon. But he just can't get, like, now he's fighting in Sydney, Australia against a relatively meaningless opponent, you know, like.
But that's going to happen, you know.
It happens.
Like,
it's the
all,
fight
all
game.
you can do, all you can do if you're Volkanovski is just go out there and just beat the crap out of this dude and hope that that's enough.
Yeah, we like Volkanovski's game a lot, though. Volkanovski, if we often talk about the meta game change of crazy, aggressive, high-paced wrestle boxers. Volkanovski is like at the top of the food chain for that type. He's the ferocity of his ground and pound is honestly like unmatched at featherweight. I can't think of anybody else who punishes people. He's the only person who throws comparable ground and pound to the stuff Khabib was throwing in the Michael Johnson fight that I can think of.
Yeah, he's the kind of dude who's going to, rather than trying to solely stick you on the ground or and control you exclusively for long periods, the way we used to see in MMA grappling, or the kind of guy who was going to let you scramble in order to get to your back, the way that we've seen in the last few years. That's kind of been the metagame direction that grappling has taken. What we're seeing now, that guys like Volkanovski and Khabib really embody, and we see this too from Daniel Cormier and saw this from Cain Velasquez as well. They let you move under them, but they're always a step or two ahead of you. You can't. They let you move in order to wear you out and find positions from which to strike and from which to try to find submissions, but not solely to get to dominant positions. Like, they're not trying to bait you into letting them have a dominant position. They're just saying you can move, but you're going to move in the ways that I'm comfortable with letting you move.
I would say maybe the best way to phrase that distinction is that they're not control grapplers, they are pressure grapplers.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
Because the positions that guys like Volkanovski definitely prefers positions like knee on belly, like half Nelsons. He will often just stand and put pressure on the back of somebody's head as they try to stand up, like something where he's not controlling your body, but he is. In some ways, it's better to not try to control the entirety of the body and just put a lot of pressure control on one part of the body.
Because you know where they're going to go from.
Exactly.
Right?
If you push down on a guy's head, there's a predictable way he's going to react to that.
Exactly. You think about it like a flow chart. You are picking and choosing which directions your opponent can go in the flow chart from there.
Yeah.
Guys like Khabib is the absolute master of that, but Volkanovski kind of embodies that as well in a little rawer, and more like overwhelmingly physical kind of way. Like the fact that the dude is just a tank of a fighter is also a big part of why I enjoy watching him. He's super athletic and hits super hard and just like blasts dudes. I love that. I love watching guys like that.
I guess that's why I always think of these guys as knee on belly fighters in my head.
Yeah,
because like that's what knee on belly is. Like, it sucks to be in it and you have to move, and you can either turn into somebody or you can turn away or you can get blasted in the face. And so, like, it's perfect because there's only a few options, and any of them, the guy in knee on belly is on top, hurting you with his knee on your gut, so he has the advantage in reacting to whatever you decide to do. Mm-hmm. Love it. I think that's probably about all that, except for the People's Main Event, Damian Brown versus Frank Camacho, which I know you're very excited about, Pat. You love both of those fighters. Tell me why you like them as much as you do.
This is beneath you, Connor. This is frankly
That's
beneath you.
That's a good fight right there, man. It's going to be one of the better fights in the card, I promise you. It's going to be action.
I'm tuning you out right now.
All right.
I'm reading an email instead of listening to this nonsense.
On that note, why don't we end this segment then? Werdum-Tybura is the main event for UFC Sydney, but last weekend we had quite a few notable things happening at UFC Norfolk with the main event between Dustin Poirier and Anthony Pettis. We're going to talk about that after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're here talking about UFC Norfolk now, the main event lightweight contenders fight between Dustin Poirier and Anthony Pettis. And of many notable things to happen on this card, I think this fight was particularly notable. First, because it seemed to be a classic Dustin Poirier fight, and sadly for Anthony Pettis, what seems to be the general mold of his fights these days. Then, notable because of the very strange ending. Anthony Pettis was forced to tap from what I'm assuming was some kind of rib separation when he tried to spin out of an extremely tight body triangle from Dustin Poirier. Thoughts on the fight, man?
Yeah, I mean, so to me, this fight was all about fundamentals. And that's what I thought beforehand, and it's still what I think now. And this has been the downfall of Anthony Pettis over the last 3 years now, is that there's just lots of fundamental stuff that he never learned how to do because he's such a talented athlete. He never learned to cut a tight pivot. He never learned real cage craft. He never learned how to stick and move. He never learned how to keep his head moving in the pocket. He never learned all of these basic fundamental things that most fighters learn when they're young in their careers, because he never had to. I think because at this point, I'm comfortable saying he was not especially well coached from a fundamental technical perspective. And when his weaknesses became clear, instead of addressing the fundamental issues, they tried to paper over them by just drilling into him that he needed to throw back. So instead of saying, Anthony, you're getting pressured, you need to learn when and how to cut an angle to escape to get back to open space, they taught him to bite down and throw when his opponent threw, in the hopes that he would be able to scare off his opposition.
What else we always talk about the pivots. You know what else would have been a helpful skill for Anthony Pettis? I've noticed this stands out to me a lot lately, because very few people in MMA seem to know how to do it or seem comfortable doing it. Just closing the distance. Just when Dustin Poirier is running after you, swinging hooks, happily shifting out of stance so he can reach you with his next shot, just step into him. It's
smother him.
Way safer than backing up. Yeah, smother him. That's like the thing in boxing. Someone's like, he needs to hold, he needs to smother, he needs to get inside. He cannot just try to defend all these shots at range. And yet, it never even occurs to Anthony to just step into the dude who's chasing him.
That's not just an Anthony Pettis thing. That's an MMA metagame thing in general. Right. Though I think we're starting to see it a little more. Like we saw it from Joanna Jędrzejczyk when she fought Jessica Andrade. If Andrade got a little bit too close and was winging those hooks, Joanna would step in, grab a hold of the clinch real quick, land a knee or an elbow, then push off. Because this is the thing. I think MMA fighters don't do this, because generally if you're getting pursued, you're not the one who wants to shoot for a takedown or wants to be in the clinch. You want to maintain your distance. And so the idea is, well, if I clinch up with them, or if I move inside, I'm giving the opponent who's coming after me the opportunity to grab a clinch or look for a takedown. Like I'm giving them the distance they want. Really, what you're doing there is dictating the terms under which you engage, right? So if you step in, engage, you get to choose your underhook or overhook. You get to choose where your feet are going to be relative to your opponents. You control that engagement, and that also means that you control when and how to escape from that engagement. Right. Yeah. So
I think too that's why we're going to see the renaissance of the Thai clinch in MMA as a result. Yeah. Like Angela Hill was doing that to Nina Ansarov. She also did it to Jessica Andrade. Phil McKenzie pointed out, I think on Twitter, that that was one of the better things that Chito Vera did in his fight with John Lineker, is that he used the clinch to meet Lineker's aggressive advances, and it was way more effective than people who feel like the only way to do that is to shoot for a takedown.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's such a great point, because that was really that you're absolutely right about that. That is, you have two options when an opponent pursues you. One is to find ways to to escape and increase the distance. The other is to deny the most dangerous distance there, which is going to be the pocket with your back to the fence. Yeah. Right. So like the McGregor Mayweather fight, paradoxically speaking, was a great example of this, because instead of just keeping his distance the whole time, Floyd smothered Conor as that fight went on, right? Like he discovered what is the distance at which Conor's punches have snap, and then Floyd stepped inside that repeatedly, over and over and over and over and over again. And then he was the one dictating the clinches, and he was the one wearing Conor out, and so on and so forth. But that was a masterclass. That's what really great outfighters do, is you're either all the way out or all the way in. Right. Pettis never learned how to do either of those things, frankly.
No, all the way out. If you give him all the way out, he's still a remarkably talented fighter.
Remarkably dangerous, too.
Yes. Yeah, but you got to give it to him. That's the problem these days that Pettis is still struggling to overcome. Poirier, in my mind, was a predictably dangerous opponent in that way, because Poirier is going to try and crash through that distance. He's going to try to get into the pocket, and he is going to shift his weight back and forth and just rip hooks and uppercuts around your guard. Like Poirier's punches are uniquely designed to get around the very rote defense that most MMA fighters have when you put that kind of pressure on them.
Yeah, the Poirier. Well, okay, so I want to shift to talking about Poirier in just a second, but just a few more comments about Pettis.
Sure.
real quick, is once like I want to come back to this idea of drilling in the instincts to throw back, because I think that while it worked in the short run, remember how he leveled Gilbert Melendez with that uppercut and then choked him out?
Yep.
And he tried to do the same thing to Rafael dos Anjos in that fight. It was just successful enough as a tactical response to getting pressured that it talked Pettis into thinking that he could exchange, right? Or that was somehow beneficial to him in the long run. And it's just not. He's not a pocket fighter. And the second that he agreed to engage Poirier in that kind of fight, I turned to my dog who was watching the fight with me, and I said, "The fight's over." She looked at me like she didn't know what I was talking about. But
she never understands these things, right? She just does not get the metagame.
She doesn't. She doesn't understand the metagame, and frankly, it's starting to piss me off. She should know by this point. But yeah, I mean, but like literally the second Pettis started to throw back at Poirier when Poirier got inside, I was like, yeah, it's only a matter of time, because Pettis doesn't do that like with any eye to strategic sense. It's just an ingrained response. And so the second Poirier figured out that he could bait Pettis into throwing back at him, it's like, oh, that's just the fight right there. That's the whole thing. But Poirier, to me, this fight summed up all the good things about Dustin Poirier, which is his natural aggression. He's always an aggressive fighter. And like his coaches have worked to try to moderate that and modulate it, which is smart. You can't just be a balls to the wall aggressive guy all the time. But like a matchup like this allowed Poirier to do what he's most comfortable doing, which is pressuring you, getting in your face, pushing you back to the fence, and just fucking unloading whenever he gets the opportunity to do it. Like, so it was a joy to just watch him do the things that he does best.
Yeah, that was actually the moment at which I turned to my dog and said, Pettis is losing this fight, is as soon as Poirier just got to pressure. Honestly, like, because that was the thing in the Jim Miller fight, right? That Jim Miller, once I saw Jim Miller was not effectively being able to push Pettis back, that Pettis was not like being made to respect Miller's weapons and keep a distance as a result of that, I knew that Jim Miller was not going to be able to take it from Pettis. And as soon as I saw Pettis backing up towards the fence several times in a row against Dustin Poirier, I turned to my dog. I said, it's over for Anthony. And my dog, probably because he or she does not exist, didn't have any reaction whatsoever. So
that's just a very sad story.
A very sad day for me and my not dog. But Dustin Poirier, the pressure, like, you cannot let Dustin Poirier back you up. And if you do, literally the only way to stop it is to catch him in an exchange, because to this day, Poirier does still like to just unload. Like, it doesn't take a lot to convince him that it's the right time to let go 12 full-powered hooks in a row. You know what I mean? He just needs to shell you up once. You need to react badly to one clean shot, and he's going to pour it on. And there were a few moments Anthony Pettis almost managed to catch him in those exchanges the way that Eddie Alvarez did. But that's just not Anthony Pettis' game. Like, Eddie Alvarez has a lot more experience of responding to people who hurt him by hitting him in the pocket and surviving.
He's just a much better technical pocket fighter.
True.
Pettis got taught to throw back. Alvarez, for all of his flaws, has a sense for how you use footwork and head movement and kind of layered defense in the pocket to be dangerous there.
Pettis throws back, but Eddie Alvarez counters. Like, exactly, has actual counters built in.
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent point. And like, so, but to me, this fight just summed up the difference between two guys who, like, one guy who has been really well trained over the course of his career since he went to ATT, and who has built in all the fundamentals of footwork and shot selection and rhythm and timing that Poirier has. Like, you look back at Poirier's first fights at ATT. I think the first one was the Jonathan Brookins. It was the Brookins fight and the Cub Swanson fight. And compare how different he looks in those fights to how he looks now. You can see this is a guy who has been really well trained for a very long time, because he has the subtleties in his game, the kind of things that you only get when you're being trained by really good coaches over a period of years and you're surrounded by good training partners. Look at this version of Pettis and compare him to the guy who lost to Rafael dos Anjos a couple of years ago, or the guy who fought Benson Henderson to win the title, or like the last fight where it really seemed to me that Pettis was like, okay, there was a leap in terms of what he was doing, was maybe the Donald Cerrone fight, and that was 2013.
Yeah, that was when he was like throwing hands, and we're like, oh my God, Anthony Pettis learned to box, and then we found out a few fights later that that's only when he's coming forward.
Yeah, so like compare the Dustin Poirier who fought Cub Swanson in February of 2013 to the Anthony Pettis who fought Donald Cerrone in January of 2013.
Yeah.
Like one of those fighters is drastically better and the other really is not.
The comparison between the progression or lack thereof is pretty striking.
Yeah. So like, and they're not that different in terms of when they started fighting. I think Poirier started fighting like a year and a half after Pettis did. So they're not generationally different fighters. It's not like from that point on, Poirier just had so much more room to improve. Like, no, they were both still guys who should have been making big leaps from fight to fight. I don't want to turn this into the Anthony Pettis hater hour, but like, I can't stop thinking at this point about what could have been with him. Like, and he won a title. He was a superstar for a little while, but like, as talented as he was, it's for me, and he was my first favorite fighter, like I remember freaking out at the Showtime kick, like sitting in my apartment back in 2010, like that. I remember that and thinking like the sky is the limit for this guy. He's going to be the greatest ever. And just like it never happened.
I think that's probably the real source of our frustrations, right? Like it's not that we don't like Anthony Pettis. It's that we're frustrated because we do like Anthony Pettis. And in a way, it really sucks to see the end of his career just be him having no choice but to engage in wars with fighters who are just better warriors. Pettis just has never found a way to keep to be a sniper against the warrior. He's never found a way to enforce his game when somebody like Dustin Poirier is determined to take it away from him. And it sucks because when he's given his fight, he's so much better than that.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It really is just frustration from what might have been.
Speaking of Poirier's improvements, what did you think of his wrestling in this fight?
People were acting like that was a surprise. I was not surprised.
No, he went for a lot of takedowns against Joe Duffy too. I think that's like working into the clinch and mixing up takedowns and just dragging people into this brutal ground and pound kind of fight against the fence is a part of the Poirier game at this point.
Yeah, well, but it has been for a really long time. I think because he went through that stretch where he was such a big time puncher and was just wrecking dudes with that. Like when he wrecked Yancy Medeiros in the first round and Diego Ferreira and Akira Corsani and Diego Brandao. Like he went and going back to like the Eric Koch fight. So basically Eric Koch or Diego Brandao back in 2013. It's easy to forget that in his early career, Poirier was a grappler.
Yes.
Like mostly he was a wrestle grappler. Like that was really his game. He got beat on the feet. He was game on the feet against Chan Sung Jung, but really like he was trying for takedowns that whole fight. That's how he got finished. He didn't do a good job of setting up his takedowns and got his neck taken. But that was really his game for years and years and years, was like a top control wrestle grappler who could strike a bit and liked those long shifting punches to get into range. Now he still has that skill set to fall back on. And that's how he's a well-trained fighter, because even as he was fleshing out his game and trying to figure out what kind of guy he wanted to be, he didn't lose those skill sets.
I think it's better now because now like he's clearly a very good short-range striker, and now the wrestling supplements that rather than the other way around. Which is great because there is no better way to set up when you can end a fight with any single punch. Having the capability of shooting a quick double leg against the fence really makes sense. To just expand your offensive opportunities. I was wondering though, do you have any feelings about the tactical value of going for those takedowns against Anthony Pettis? Like, I was a little. I don't know if Dustin Poirier would have approached it the same way, but I was wondering if it was really wise to continually get triangled by Anthony Pettis and then to keep taking him back down to the ground after that. Do you think Poirier thought the only way Pettis can win here is with his striking? Because I think at this point, Pettis is probably as dangerous on the ground as he is on the feet.
I maybe a better grappling head than me will have an opinion on this, but I think from Poirier's perspective, he's like, this dude is not going to triangle me. And
he came really close, and without the blood, he probably would have come a lot closer with more of them.
He was probably not as worried about it as he should have been, but I don't mind Poirier's confidence in his top game at that point. I think if somebody wants to fight off their back in the metagame of MMA in 2017, unless it's Brian Ortega, I guess, you let them try to fight off their back, and you just say, I'm going to stay tight, and I'm going to stay confident, and I'm going to land shots when I can. And if that's how they want to spend their energy, I am happy to make that trade. Like, I don't think as outside of probably Ortega, and even Ortega, like Thiago Tavares was able to put in work on the top against Brian Ortega. I think that's a trade you make. Like, you just trust that you know what you're doing well enough from top position to not get submitted by that dude.
Yes. Well, we're going to see that metagame shifting too. We'll talk about that when we get to Marlon Moraes, I think, whose jiu-jitsu deserves a little shout on this episode as well. But I think that's probably about all we have to say on Poirier Pettis. What do you
want to take a break, or do we want to keep going in this segment?
Yeah, why don't we take a break? Before we do that, I want final thoughts on that fight. I want to know what you think about Poirier's call out. I mean, I respect the man for really putting himself out there and making a very, very aggressive, assertive call out at the end of that fight for a fight that I think you could definitely say he deserves. Winner of the Alvarez-Gaethje fight. We don't have to predict who's going to win that, but which of those do you think is the better matchup for Poirier?
Alvarez.
I would agree.
I think Gaethje would engage Poirier in exactly the kind of fight that Poirier wants, and I think Gaethje just hits so much harder on a shot-for-shot basis
and takes a better shot.
Yeah, I mean, that's just but most importantly, I think can engage him in the kinds of like grimy wrestling and clinch exchanges that Poirier relies on at close range. Like, that's kind of Poirier's safety blanket, and has been for many, many years now, is that he's a nasty clinch fighter. I don't think he can, and he uses that to get a little break if he gets rocked, if he takes a shot he doesn't like in the pocket. That's not a safe spot for you.
No, it's the opposite of a safe spot against Gaethje to let him clinch with you. Yeah, it would kind of be. I guess I would say it would remind me of like I don't know, like Douglas De Silva Andrade, like a solid athletic puncher taking on, I'm trying to think of him because he's a bantamweight, taking on John Lineker, right? Yeah. Like, it's just the hyper version of what you do.
Yeah, like, this is, I would love to see that fight. I mean, from the perspective of action, like, I think that would be a fight of the year contender for as long as it lasted.
Yeah.
But I think that's a real bad matchup for him. I think the Alvarez matchup is Poirier would do pretty much what he did the first time. I think that's a real bad matchup for Eddie. I thought it was a bad matchup the first time. I think it's a bad matchup now. If Alvarez comes out of the Gaethje fight, which I don't think he will. I think Gaethje is going to eat a bunch of shots and then knock Alvarez out.
That sounds like a Dustin Gaethje fight to me, so I don't think that's a particularly bold prediction.
Well, thanks, Connor.
No, I'm not discrediting your prediction. It's just that is Eddie Alvarez's fights, man. Like, yeah, and Justin Gaethje. Like, yeah, he's going to take a few shots. I mean, that's kind of both of their fight. I'm actually getting very excited for that matchup now, but...
Dude, it's a really fucking good fight.
Yeah, it's going to be.
We have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah. Okay, let's take that break then. When we come back, we got a lot more to talk about from this card. So we are going to try to cover a good portion of the rest of UFC Norfolk before getting on to at least one heavy bag question before we wrap things up. So we'll be back with the rest of UFC Norfolk after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Let's go ahead and jump in talking about the rest of UFC Norfolk. Quite a bit to cover here. We'll try and do it relatively quickly. Matt Brown fought Diego Sanchez in the co-main event. Murdered the man. Can't say we didn't see that one coming. Once again, a classic Matt Brown fight. Ate a horrible liver shot that very visibly, in Derek Lewis fashion, crumpled him on the feet. And then went and hit Diego Sanchez with possibly the most vicious elbow to the back of the head since Nate Marquardt's knockout of Tyron Woodley.
That was, oh boy.
Yeah.
That was a heck of a shot there. I'm going to be real sad if Matt Brown retires because he is just one of my favorite fighters to watch and has been for a very long time. But that was what we expected to happen there. It never ceases to surprise me, Connor, that we do not see more elbows in MMA. Like when Brown was on his run up a few years ago and he was elbowing the shit out of everybody, I thought, okay, yes, everybody's finally going to see how useful elbows are. We're going to see them more and more and more and more and more. And we've seen them a little more, like in Jacek using them, Tom Duquesnoy using them a lot, Brown using them a lot, but they have not taken the kind of central spot that I thought they would. I thought they would be like, it would be like a thing, the new thing that everybody was doing, and it just hasn't.
Do you think elbows are just the heel hook of fighting? Like there's a lot of strikers I think are cautious about throwing elbows because you sort of invite yourself to an elbow exchange, and exchanging elbows is one of the most dangerous things I think you can do. Like where you're both in a super short range with these strikes that require no wind up to do devastating damage. Like I'm thinking of Mike Perry's equally impressive elbow knockout of Jake Ellenberger. Ellenberger was going for an elbow when Perry caught him. You know, that kind of stuff happens a lot.
I don't think so. I think it's just because not that many guys train them. Frankly, I don't think that they
are hard to train in sparring. They're hard to train.
Yeah, it's hard. That's a really good point. They are hard to use in sparring. They're not hard to train on pads. Like if you you can train them regularly. But I think the difficulty of using them in sparring is one piece of it. I just don't think enough people are planning how to use them in the context of the MMA metagame. That because it's not just Muay Thai positions that lead you to being able to use elbows. It's like there are elbows all over the place, or opportunities for them. Like you remember back in the day when Uriah Faber fought Brian Bowles, the elbow that he just damn near took the side of his head off with. Like Bowles was kind of turtled up on the ground.
Oh yeah.
And Faber just launches this enormous elbow at him and rocks him and then guillotines him. Why don't we see more guys going for elbows from that position, like a huge wind-up slashing elbow?
Don't know. And if we may not have any time to talk about him, but we may have a new elbow god in the middleweight division in Carl Robertson, who has now tried to savage two, more or less UFC opponents with elbows with great success.
That dude is really talented. I had not watched his Tuesday Night Contender Series fight.
It was only 11 seconds long, so... Yeah, or 15 seconds before he knocked the guy with an elbow. So maybe we got a new star if Matt Brown does retire. That's probably about all there is to say about that fight, though. Like Diego Sanchez, there's nothing really to say about urging him to stop fighting. He's clearly committed to it. He came out immediately after this knockout and said, "I'm not done just yet," as if we're all supposed to be titillated and excited by that news. I'm just going to try to,
Nothing but respect for the guy, but I really don't want to see that.
No, yeah, I'm just going to try to ignore a lot of it and only watch his fights because it's my job. Let's talk about Junior Albini's diaper. I mean, his Junior Albini's unsuccessful game plan is what I want to talk about.
Yeah, so props to Andrei Arlovsky, who looked totally rejuvenated. Did you see him using his left hand, Connor?
Yeah, where did that come from? Where did Andrei Arlovsky?
He went to ATT for this camp.
Who do they have, by the way, teaching? Because, honestly, he spent one camp at ATT and came back looking like Ioane Jacek.
It's Daya Ali Davis, who is Howard Davis's son, is their boxing coach.
Impressed, man. Arlovsky, after years, learned to throw a consistent jab. He learned to regularly follow his right hand with the left hook. He looked awesome. He really looked technically probably better than he ever has.
Yeah, he looked totally rejuvenated. What a great fight from him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Albini is still a talented dude, but I think I'm not trying to body shame him here, but he would be, if he could cut maybe 15 or 20 pounds off him and get on a better strength and conditioning program. He's a naturally talented guy. He's pretty light on his feet for such a big dude. He's obviously incredibly strong.
Quick hands.
There's real talent there. If he could get in slightly better shape, and just move a little bit faster, get a little more explosive, physically speaking, he can really compete in this division. He's obviously tough. He's obviously very composed. There's a lot to like about his game, but I really think the kind of physical aspects, unless he gets in a little better shape, are going to hold him back.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think these are the fights, though, that Albini was favored too heavily. I think we would all agree. To beat Arlovsky here, but that's why these fights need to happen. The young, untested guys need to be tested, because now we get to see that Arlovsky still has something in the tank, that he's not as done as maybe people thought he was going into that fight. Also, that Albini has some things to work on, but things that I think he clearly can work on.
Agreed.
He is a talented young fighter.
Props to Rafael Assunção for putting together like a perfect fight against Matthew Lopez. That was as good a fight as I think we've seen from Rafael Assunção in a very long time. Like, looked great on every level.
Matthew Lopez, who was giving him some things to worry about in the first round.
Lopez is a good fighter.
Yeah, and getting better pretty quickly. And Assunção was having a hard time finding his range at first, and he was having a hard time predicting Lopez's attacks because I think he came in totally concerned about the takedown, and Lopez was doing a good job of mixing up his strikes and just catching. I think he had quite a considerable reach advantage over Rafael too, so that was giving him a little trouble. Obviously, the inside leg kicks were a turning point for Rafael Assunção, but I just want to give a little praise to the technical brilliance of Rafael Assunção.
Yeah, he's really good.
That even like he has a weird style, right? It's not conventional or orthodox, really, or maybe it's a style built of orthodox pieces from many different styles. But I want to give put a little spotlight on the fact that Assunção was throwing a very weird combination after whiffing on a left hook, and through this right hand that before it even landed, you're like, this is a weird punch. And then it lands, and if you freeze frame, you look at the man's body, we got the weight balanced slightly forward as he throws the right hand. We got him turning on the ball of the right foot. We got him shifting his hip through the shot. Like, everything comes together, even in the midst of these weird, wild exchanges that allow Assunção to be exceptionally dangerous, even with shots that don't seem to land that clean or don't seem to land at the optimal distance. He's just a very put-together fighter.
Yeah, incredibly calm under pressure.
Oh, my God.
Like, there's so much to like about Assunção's game. Like, he strikes me as a dude that we're not really going to appreciate until he's done fighting. Like, somebody will discover Rafael Assunção fights in 4 years after he retires and be like, wow, that dude was incredibly gifted and incredibly
I appreciate
skilled.
him. That's me now. Yeah. I'm just going to be doing it still in 5 years.
I've come around to it. I didn't appreciate him enough until probably because he's in so many like really close fights.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the actual brilliance of Assunção's game has really sunk into me. It's starting to.
You got to understand it in the aggregate, because each individual fight is not always that exciting or interesting. But
that's true.
He's a remarkable fighter, man.
Real quick, I want to say one thing about Joe Lauzon. That was one of the more worrisome performances I've ever seen from somebody.
Yeah.
So I got some pushback for this. I said it on Twitter, but I want to explore it in just a little bit more depth before we move on. Mm-hmm. What worried me was he was not responding when he saw Guida throw.
Yes.
Like, he would see Guida would throw and Lauzon would just stand there. Like, his reflex, it wasn't just after he got hit with the shot that rocked him. It wasn't when he was on the ground. It was from the very beginning of the fight when Guida would look to throw a combination. Lauzon was just frozen. Like, he could not pull the trigger. He could not respond in any sort of meaningful way. His reflexes are fucking gone. Like, that dude should not be fighting again. Like, if you cannot respond to Clay Guida throwing shots at you, like, that's you're not physically there enough to be competing in the UFC. Like, that was one of the more deeply worrisome things I've ever seen. Like, we talk a lot about guys being, are they still in their prime? Are they past their prime? Like, it is rare to see a guy whose reflexes are just gone, completely gone. Like, it reminded me a lot of Yves Edwards versus Akbar Ariola a few years ago.
Yeah.
Which was Edwards' retirement fight. And like, this was way worse than that. Way worse in terms of just seeing the shots. Like, his eyes were following them. He was seeing them and he was just not responding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his brain was registering it, but it was not sending the nerve impulse to his body to move quickly enough.
Yeah. That was very disturbing to me. Like, I don't know why that disturbed me as much as it did, but it's like viscerally watching that, I was like, oh, this is real bad. This is real not good.
Didn't stand out to me then, but now you got me worried about it. So congratulations.
Yeah, if you like, seriously, it's one of the more extreme examples of that I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, yeah, we'll have to keep an eye out for that. And I don't know. Joe Lauzon has not really looked. I think he's been on a pretty visible decline for a few years. But Clay Guida came out, he was aggressive. Maybe Joe just didn't expect it. But to get blasted out like that by Clay Guida does say something. It does say something. Not good. It's not good, especially if you're the guy whose best round is always the first, and then you get taken out like that in a minute. It's not a good sign for Joe. I want to give a little. How much more time do we have here?
A few minutes. Okay. Moraes Dodson, thoughts?
Yes, quick thing on Marlon Moraes. We saw this fight as a worse version of the Rafael Assunção fight, or an altered version that could even be more challenging, Marlon Moraes took all the mistakes he made in the Rafael Assunção matchup and did away with them. I think our main missive for him before the bout was that you just have to throw against these guys, and he did it. He was extremely aggressive with his kicking game. I think he took advantage of the fact that he was such a bigger guy to get past some of Dodson's speed advantage by just lacing him up with kicks at long range, thinking, I guess, that Dodson could not easily counter those, which he couldn't. He had to eat a lot of kicks to the body and could only really back up and put himself too far away to respond if he wanted to avoid them. To me, though, what really stood out here were the little glimpses of Marlon Moraes' jiu-jitsu. His grappling was... We've seen, if you've been following like the TriStar YouTube channel or anything going on in the jiu-jitsu scene nowadays, which is like leg locks are the new metagame in jiu-jitsu. Marlon Moraes, that was one of the better examples of that style of grappling I've seen in the UFC yet, to this date, of when somebody gets you off balance or puts you down, you instantly lock in tight on a leg and just force them to pull out, and then you can pop back up to your feet. Or maybe you get a sweep, maybe you transition to a better position, maybe you go for the leg finish, but Moraes was in tight on heel hooks and ankle control positions the moment that Dodson threw him to the ground every single time that happened.
Yeah, no, it was he looked real good there. I was still surprised Moraes didn't throw more than he did. I thought Dodson looked a little sharper as a counterpuncher than he has, and maybe that was part of it. But like Moraes in the past has been a guy who's going to throw 15, 20 strikes a minute and really put volume on you, and we have yet to see that from him in his UFC career. So that's a little worrisome to me as he tries to move up the ladder here.
I think it's a bit of an adjustment period needed, right? Like the level of somebody like John Dodson and an opponent like Rafael Assunção, like that is very different to the guys that Moraes was fighting in World Series of Fighting. It's a big step up in terms of striking skill and how much speed. Like Dodson brings a level of speed that Moraes has probably never even encountered before.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
So I think like he did in this fight, what he made the adjustments in this fight after some early trouble that he failed to make in the Assunção fight. And I would say pretty good performance. It's gotten me back hyped again about Marlon Moraes. I don't want to jump off the hype train too quickly, and I see enough signs of improvement from the last fight to this one to say that I think Moraes is still going places. Okay, that's probably all about time we have to cover, even though there are other things interesting to talk about. Sage Northcutt, Tatiana Suarez. But let's go ahead and do a question just quickly before we wrap up. This one comes to us from, I think this is a very good question. This is from Jonathan on Patreon. He asks, viewers often hear talk about improvements or the evolution of a fighter, but unless the fighter is a neophyte, I often contend that any improvements seen are a result of matchups instead of actual technical improvement. How do we tell the difference? How do you tell if a guy is actually getting better or if he's just doing better, basically?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple of components to it. You can see objective improvements in fundamental technique. I think that's something that stands out. Is a fighter throwing his or her punches straighter? Are they turning their hip over more? Are they getting more weight behind it? Is their weight more balanced? What does their footwork look like? Are they finding better angles? Just watch them for a minute and see what they're doing and see, does this look like an improvement according to objective technical standards, which I think do exist. We're not going to be curmudgeonly about a guy not throwing his right hand right, or about a woman not throwing a left body kick, correctly or something like that. There are other more important things, but there are still ideal types of what a thing is supposed to look like, and you can compare that.
Yeah.
So that's one component. I don't know. What would you say, Connor?
Yeah, there's often, I think he hits on a very real dynamic, which is that it's really easy to just say of a fighter who does better than they did in their last fight, oh, they've improved so much. And you hear that a lot. People just immediately assume somebody has, even on high profile fights, with the Dillashaw Garbrandt fight, people were saying, oh, I don't know how Garbrandt can beat Dillashaw. And I don't know. I don't see that. It's one fight in which the one guy got knocked down, and yet both guys got hurt, and one of them both almost got finished. And Yet people can look at that and say, well, because this guy won, it means the other guy can't win next time. It's too simplistic. And in the same way, you look at somebody who just wins a fight after losing a fight before without asking, has the style matchup changed? Has their technique changed in any marked way? The troublesome thing is that sometimes you do kind of just have a broad feeling of improvement, and I think that is sometimes valid. And usually I think that comes down to experience. When people get more experience, like you can tell when somebody is more comfortable, even when they're not necessarily coming that far technically. Like last weekend, this Saturday, we saw Jake Collier, and he didn't look any more technical than he has before. Like, since adding a spinning back kick to his game, he has not really sharpened up in any noticeable way, but he did look very comfortable. He looked like he knew his distance and that he was not worried at all about taking a shot back, that he was constantly looking for opportunities to use his arguably substandard technique. And those are the things where it can be tricky, right? Because you don't want to look at somebody just getting a win and saying they've improved, but sometimes it's hard to look at a specific technique to explain how someone has improved. Sometimes it's just that, you know, you can tell their sense of distance is better, that they don't move their head when a shot is clearly not going to hit them because they know they're out of reach, or they don't close their eyes in exchanges, or they have a much better idea of how to draw an attack out of somebody rather than just accepting a trade with them.
Something like rhythm or timing.
Yes.
Cage awareness is a big one to me. Like, that's something I spend a lot of time looking for, is are they aware of where they are in the cage, either as they're pressuring or as they're moving back? Like, the distance one is huge. I think distance it's so fundamental. But a lot of this to me is like, you have to spend a lot of time watching. Like, you have to have a large store of information against which you're comparing what you're seeing. Yeah. And it's both information specific to that fighter and information that's more general about what fighters' progressions look like, about somebody on the upslope or the downslope. What you're seeing is always going to be subjective, right? Like, you're never going to be 100%, but you can make better and more informed arguments about improvement on the basis of having that store of information.
Yeah, and I think, Jonathan, you hit on the right distinction. Like, the first thing to look at if you're not sure if somebody's actually getting better, I would say is the style matchup. Rather than just looking at loss to win, you say, is this style matchup the same as the last one? And if not, how is it different? How might they have been able to succeed in this style matchup as the same guy they were before, where they couldn't in the other style matchup? That's a good question to ask. Is it just the matchup, or is it improvement? Hopefully that answers some of your question at least, and that about does it for this episode of Heavy Hands. We thank you all for joining us. Hope you enjoyed our weird grab bag of what I thought was some pretty good fight discussion. A lot of, various topics that we had a good time covering. And find us on social media if you want to get after us. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman. You can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH. Find us both on Facebook.com/Patrick Wyman MMA or /Connor Rebush MMA. Check us out on Patreon for 2 or more bonus episodes every single month, and to submit your questions for the Heavy Bag. And we will see you guys again next week when we are going to be looking back at Werdum versus Tybura and looking ahead to UFC Fight Night, which is now Michael Bisping versus Kelvin Gastelum, somehow more depressing than the fight it was supposed to be. So we'll catch you guys next week for that. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.